Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start our Tuesday class with some prayers. Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parbrahma Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Om Bhu Bhava Swaha Tatsavitra Vareneyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Naha Prachodayat Asto Ma Satgamya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityorma Amritam Gamya Om Sena Bhavatu Sena Bhunaktu Saviryam Karvavahi Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahi Om Shanti 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 Om. Let's open our Mahabharata books on chapter 19, the miracle and the oaths. We read last week that how Pandavas or the king Yudhishthira, he lost everything, including himself and Draupadi also. So we are in the middle of that episode here. Bhim's chest still heaved. Arjun would have found it impossible to contain his brother, but suddenly another voice spoke, clear and ringing in the Kuru Sabha. It was Duryodhan's brother, Vikaran. He said, Draupadi is right. Dharma has left this Sabha, and we will find hell as our punishment if we don't answer her prudently and make amends for our crime against her. Duryodhan was taken aback. The elders and the Pandavas were amazed. Draupadi turned wonderingly to Vikaran, who went on, why did the Kuru elders not question Yudhishthir when he wagered Draupadi? How do they quibble about the subtleties of Dharma when nothing can be more sinful than their silence when Panchali was put up as a stake? How do these great men still keep silent when this tormented woman pleads so desperately for some mercy? Perhaps their fear of Duryodhan outweighs their love of Dharma. But I will say what I feel. Though I am afraid of my brother, I fear the consequences of our crime more. Duryodhan was too surprised to speak, and Vikaran continued, I will answer Draupadi's question. She has not been lost. She is not Duryodhan's slave. She is a free woman, as she always was. There were astonished murmurs in the Sabha, but Vikaran had not done yet. Yudhishthir wagered Draupadi because he was maddened by the dice. He was not responsible for what he did. Besides, he never thought of wagering her until Shakuni suggested it. There are other reasons why the wager is not binding. One is that Yudhishthir had already lost himself when he put up his queen. But there is another, better reason why Draupadi is a free woman, a reason that sets Pitamaha's argument at naught. What is it? Someone asked. Draupadi is not only Yudhishthir's wife. She is also the wife of Bhim, Arjun, Sahadev, and Nakul. They were not asked before she was put up as a gambling stake. They haven't wagered her, and she is no one's slave, but free. There was a small uproar, and everyone seemed convinced by Vikaran's reasoning. It was plain as day, but no one else had thought of it. Dhritarashtra froze on his throne. Bhishma, Drona, and Kripa were quiet, and even Duryodhana seemed at a loss for words. Then Karan jumped up and cried, Vikaran, your chivalry is misplaced and your logic specious. How dare you question the wisdom of the king of Bhishma and Drona, who have all found that this woman is Duryodhana's slave? How dare you air your callow opinion in front of these elders? Do you think the Pandavas would have allowed Panchali to be brought into this Sabha if they were not convinced she had been fairly won? Who was it that sent for her finally? It was Yudhishthir. Who are you to decide this thing better than he? As for all this talk of Dharam, I find it absurd. Dharam is not for these Pandavas. Have you ever heard of five brothers sharing the same woman? Is that dharam? Vikaran, you are bewitched by her beauty, but she is no chaste woman that you should plead her cause so passionately. She is no virgin who has not seen men's beds that you should feel so pained at her being brought into this sabha. Clad in half a cloth or none at all. I find your concern laughable. She is a slut shared already by five men, and now she will have more than five. To have been dragged into the sabha is no outrage to her modesty. You see, Vikaran, she has no modesty to be outraged. Duryodhan and brothers laughed at this and cried, "Well said, Karan." Karan had never forgotten how, when he took aim at the spinning fish, Draupadi had hissed, "I will not marry a Sooth." Sensing the Sabha's mood turning again, he pressed on. All six are slaves, and I think that for slaves, they stand too haughtily and wear too many fine clothes. Dushasan stripped them of their silks. Let them wear only what slaves should, and let them be made over to their master. Dushasan licked his lips. He glanced at Duryodhan, who nodded. Grinning, Dushasan went towards the Pandavas. His cousins did not wait for him, but stripped away their upper garments themselves and stood bare-bodied like slaves before their masters. Draupadi stood turned to stone. She wore just a single cloth of a menstruating woman. If Dushasan stripped that from her, she would stand naked before the Kuru Sabha. She looked piteously at Yudhishthir, then at Bhim, at Arjun, her heart breaking, and at Sahadev and Nakul. They all avoided her gaze, and she knew they would not help her because of Dharam. They too considered her fairly won. She was alone, and Dushasan came leering at her. Those moments while the Kaurav covered the distance of a few paces were an eternity. Panchali willed them to last longer than the stars. She had no one to turn to. This was the end. Then the beast was upon her. His brutal hands seized her cloth. Chuckling, her began to unwind the flimsy garment from her body. Hell took the Kuru Sabha for this sin committed in it, which would change the destiny of the world. In a swoon at the final moment, Draupadi's lips formed a name, Krishna. She breathed frantically. At once, a tide of faith surged in her, making all that court and everyone in it seem so small. Draupadi stood with her eyes shut, her hands folded like a lotus bud. Her eyelids leaked tears of rapture, but suddenly she knew she was not alone. He whose name she called as her last resort had not deserted her. Meanwhile, Dushasan was stripping her garment from her, and there was no man in that Sabha who did not stare. She was so ravishing. Which man could resist looking? It is told that even Bhishma gazed. As for Duryodhan, his eyes never left for her for an instant, as his rabid brother tore at her cloth, hand over fist, twirling her around, but Dushasan laughter died in his throat. Duryodhan's mouth was parched for strange oppression. Dushasan pulled on, and the cloth came away easily in his hands and made a swiftly mounting pile at his feet. Yet Draupadi was still clothed. She did not stand naked before their hot gazes. The Kaurav spun her around like a top, unresisting, but there was no end to her uncanny garment. Quickly, there were three piles of a shimmering cloth next to Dushasan, and now he tore at it in frenzy, sweating, cursing, maddened by the miracle unfolding in that court. Reams of cloth came away from Panchali's body in brilliant colors endlessly. The others stood transfixed, sweat breaking on them. At last, with a curse, Dushasan gave up and sat on the floor, gasping. Draupadi stood in a trance in the court of the Kurus. Tears still streamed down her face. She was lost to that Sabha, to the very world. She was far away, borne on Krishna's great mercy, and folded in it. An awestruck silence. Then Bhim's voice said quietly and clearly as a bell, I swear in the name of everything holy, I will tear Dushashan's heart out from his chest and drink his blood for what he has done today. If I don't, let me never go to my fathers in heaven, but find the narak meant for the worst sinners. But seeking to turn the tide again, Karan laughed in his face. Karan said, Dushashan, take the slave to the harem. She must learn her new duties, whatever they may be. With a start, Draupadi emerged from her trance. Terror took her again, and she wailed, I am no slave. O elders, tell them I am a free woman. But no one spoke until Vidur cried, haven't you seen the miracle of the cloth? Heaven protects her. Vikaran is right. Draupadi is no slave. The cloth of many colors lay there for all to see. The miracle had shaken Duryodhan, but then Karan had restored his gumption. The Kaurav said to Draupadi, stop repeating yourself, woman. The elders have spoken or held their peace as they saw fit. But your husbands are here in this Sabha. Let Yudhishthir decide this thing. They say he is a man of honor, and I will abide by what he decides. Let him say if you belong to him now or to me. Yudhishthir stood bare-bodied, his head bent, not saying a word. An infinitely sardonic smile curved Duryodhan's mouth. Softly now, he said, look, Draupadi, your husbands are silent. But you must have an answer. His eyes were like black flames again as he stared at her. Unwinkingly, moistening his lips, he said almost gently, I will answer your question, Panchali. Duryodhan paused. The Sabha held its breath. He continued, your husbands have forsaken you in your moment of need. So I will answer you. You were never born to be a slave, but the wife of a great king. Every bit of you cries out as much, and he who cannot see it is blind. There was another murmur in the Sabha. This from Duryodhan was the most unexpected twist of all. Shakuni turned in amazement to his nephew. Karan looked astonished, and Dushashan's mouth fell open. He said, Panchali, you are a free woman. These five are not your husbands. They do not belong to themselves anymore, but to me. Look at them. They don't say a word to guarantee your freedom. But I, Duryodhan, say to you, you are free. Choose a husband for yourself from this Sabha. Choose any Kshatriya who is not a slave. His hand swept around the court to show how wide the choice was, and it came to rest finally on his own chest. Yes, lovely woman, these are not free men anymore and must renounce their right over you. Let Yudhishthir declare that he and his brothers are not your husbands, and that you may choose a man from the rest of us. His very blandness was fearful, and his eyes glittered with lust. Draupadi felt him strip her naked with his demon's gaze, and she shivered. She did not make any reply to Duryodhan, and neither did Yudhishthir. Once more it was Bhima who exploded, fierce as the tempest his father blows on mountain tops. Ah, he roared like a wounded lion. You would all be silent, accepting that he has lost himself and dies. So I also accept it. Otherwise, Dushashan, you would not breathe after you dare touch our queen with your filthy hands. I would have torn you to pieces. Look at these arms, Kauravas. I could crush Indra with them. Be thankful for Yudhishthir and the dharam that binds me to his word. Some of the Kauravas trembled to see Bhim flex his muscles. The power of his elemental father rippled in them. His bare body filmed in sweat. The son of Vayu shook with the effort of restraining himself. He breathed heavily, and his eyes were bloodshot. Bhim was a terrifying sight. Ignoring him, Karan said coolly, listen to me, Panchali. The plain truth is, you are a slave. No slave owns anything. even himself. Since your husbands are slaves, how can they own you? Dhritarashtra's sons are your masters now. Take yourself to their harem and choose a husband from among them who will not cheat. Laughter from most of the 100. Flaming Bhim turned on Yudhishthir again. Would he dare talk like this except for your foolishness? Duryodhan said, Karan speaks the truth. Yudhishthir, since your brothers will not speak their minds out of regard for you, I ask you once more, is Draupadi a slave or a free woman? Answer me. Still Yudhishthir made no reply. Duryodhan exchanged a knowing grin with Karan. Keeping Bhim in clear view out of the corner of his eye, Duryodhan leaned back in his chair and exposed his thigh up to his manhood, patted the beard flesh, and said obscenely, You are a free woman, my love. Your husbands have lost you at dice. Come sit here in my lap where you belong. Bhim sprang at Duryodhan with a howl, and it was all Arjun, Sahadev, and Nakul could do to hold him back. Then all at once a vision swept Bhim. It was as if his anger had steamed back a veil in his mind, and now he saw through time. In a trance, he said, I will break that thigh one day with my mace and kill you, Duryodhan. If I don't, may I live in hell forever. Karan said, Dushashan, why waste time? Take the woman to the harem. Duryodhan will enjoy her from today. Draupadi was a deer cornered by hunters. Her breath was shallow, her eyes full of panic. She cried again to the Kuru elders, Oh, save me, I am no slave. But not Dhritarashtra, Drona, or Bhishma said a word, as if they had lost their wits, their tongues, as if fate addled their hearts, so they no longer knew right from wrong. But Vidur was on his feet once more, trying desperately to make his brother see reason. Meanwhile, Bhim's vision showed up a lucid glimpse of the future. In that court of shame in Hastinapur, speaking more like a prophet than himself, he said in the strangest voice, I will kill Duryodhan at the great war on the crack of the ages. Arjun will kill Karan and Sahadev will kill Shakuni. I see it all happening before my eyes. Dushashan, I see myself holding your heart in my hands and drinking your blood. Then, by uncanny osmosis, Arjun saw part of his brother's vision. He breathed, The war on the crack of the ages for which we have all been born, the earth will drink the blood of these beasts. Bhim, Duryodhan, Dushashan, Karan, and Shakuni will be meat for scavengers on a sacred battlefield, where justice will be done for today's crimes. I swear I will kill Karan at the war. Why we shall slaughter thousands and Yam's gates will yawn upon, open to receive them. Bhim, my brother, Himavan may move from his place. The planets may swerve from their orbits. The sun may lose his fire and the moon his cool luster. But Arjun will keep the oath he has sworn today. Sahadev shared their vision through time and he said, Shakni, you are a blot on the house of Gandhar. Your dice will turn into silver arrows and fly to drink your blood. I see myself killing you, Shakuni. I only wonder if you will take the field. If you do, snake, you shall die. Shakuni blanched his hands, which still held the fateful dice, were clammy. Nakul too was subtly invaded by the vision, and he was saying to Shakuni, and I will kill your son, Uluk, for bearing your blood in his veins. Your venomous spawn must not survive you. I also see the war upon the edge of the ages. I see all these mocking sons of Dhritarashtra lying dead, with vultures and jackals staring at their flesh. I see the end of the glory of the house of Kuru for the crime committed against Panchali today. Was it a hallucination, or did fine petals which seemed made of fireflies' lights rain down on the Pandavas out of the air? An unearthly fragrance blew through that sabha as if heaven endorsed their ferocious oaths. Encouraged by the omens, Arjun breathed, I can hardly wait for the war to kill these cowards. His hand gripped the Gandhiv that lay beside him. But for Yudhishthir, I would have revenge now. Arjun half raised his bow, and the earth shuddered at his fury. But Yudhishthir grasped his brother's hand. The older Pandav said a strange thing then softly, so only his brother heard him. Arjun, be calm. Don't forget Dharam. Anger took me also when I heard what Karan said, but I looked down in my misery and I saw his feet. Suddenly, on my wrath ebbed from me because Karan's feet reminded me of our mother Kunti's. His feet are so much like hers, and I felt she came to comfort me, and I grew calm again. Arjun stared at his brother. This was the queerest thing he had yet heard. But somehow what Yudhishthir said quieted Arjun. Silence had fallen again in the Sabha of Hastinapur. A jackal howled on the palace steps. In unnerving cacophony, its weird cry was answered by harsh throated birds of carrion, vultures, crows, and kites. All round the city, wolves and hyenas added their voices to the infernal din. When his dead brother, Pandu's sons, swore their fierce oath in his Sabha, Dhritarashtra shivered on his throne. Now, at the macabre chorus from the creatures of earth and air, the blind king panicked. Duryodhan, he said, you have called your death to you. Ah, Draupadi, where are you, my child? She stood before him. Held firm by terror now, Dhritarashtra said, Panchali, my foolish son has done an unforgivable thing today. To atone for it, I will grant you any boon you want. Just ask and it shall be yours. Duryodhan froze in shock. Karan, the other Kauravas, turned to their king and father, hardly believing what they heard. Draupadi also stared incredulously at Dhritarashtra for a moment. Then, realizing he meant what he said, she grew calmer. She stopped trembling and asked, let Yudhishthir be free. I grant you Yudhishthir's freedom. You deserve another boon, chaste queen. Draupadi said at once, let Bhim, Arjun, Sahadev, and Nakul be free, and their chariots and weapons restored to them. So be it, said the king. But two boons are not enough for a daughter in law as virtuous as you. Ask me for another. With a swift glance at Yudhishthir, Draupadi said, my lord, it is greed that destroys Dharam. I will ask for just two boons. It already means more than the world to me that my husbands are free men again. Karan sneered. These Pandavas are lucky to escape so lightly. Such great Kshatriyas can only be saved by a woman. Furious that the day was wasted after all, he stalked out of the Sabha and Duryodhan went with him. Most of the Kauravas followed them in disgust. Yudhishthir and his brothers gathered their silks from the pile on the floor and covered themselves, even as if they were born again at their moment. Yudhishthir came and prostrated himself before Dhritarashtra. My lord, you have always commanded us, and we have obeyed you without question. Tell us what to do now. Dhritarashtra said shrewdly, Yudhishthir, noblest Kshatriya, sovereign without any enemy, listen to an old man today. The wise never harbor hostility. The good man forgets the faults of others, and the best man forgives them, even when he himself has borne their burden. In the purity of his heart, the virtuous man only sees the virtue in everyone else. Yudhishthir, forgive my son his sins today against you and yours. Return to your city in the forest and rule as before from Khandavprastha. Try to banish every memory of this day from your mind. Think of it all as no more than a bad dream. My son, go home with peace in your heart. This is my fervent wish, and I shall be the happiest man alive if you accede to it. Duryodhan and you are cousins. You are older than he is. You are selfless and mature, while he is spoilt and rash. O Yudhishthir, forgive my foolish son, or he will perish. I beg this of you as a boon to an old man. Yudhishthir said, I will do whatever you say. Do as you ask, my lord. Bitter as it has been, I will forget what happened here today. But with your leave now, I must return to Indraprastha. And with Draupadi beside him and his brothers following him, Yudhishthir set out for home. He was perfectly prepared to put all the shame of the day behind him. But he wondered how Duryodhan would accept having everything he schemed for. All that he had won today, a kingdom, his cousin's shame, their very freedom, snatched from him in a moment by his father's terrified generosity. Next chapter, Dhritarashtra's fickleness. Duryodhan had followed Karan and Shakni out of the Sabha. He did not what Dhritarashtra finally said to the Pandavas. He thought his father had restored only their liberty to the sons of Pandu. But when the Pandavas left Hastinapur, Dushashan came running to his brother. What is the matter, Dushashan? The king has given back everything you won from them, cried Dushashan. The coward, his brother hissed, and stalked back into the Sabha where Dhritarashtra sat with Gandhari beside him. Father, what have you done? You swore you would not interfere, and now you have given back everything, their kingdom, their wealth, their freedom, everything. Do you prefer your brother's sons to your own? Perhaps you want me to kill myself. Dhritarashtra grew increasingly distressed. Duryodhan was the only one who could tear the blind man's mask away from his father's face, for the king loved his prince. How foolish could you be? Raged Duryodhan. The Pandavas were more powerful than us. We decided to ruin them at dice. When that was done, it was safe to humiliate them and their women. You have given them back their power. They were already dangerous. Now they are like cobras spitting venom. What madness possessed you, father? Already Arjun, Bhim, and the twins stroked their weapons in anticipation of revenge. Didn't you hear the oaths they swore? Yet you set them free and gave them back their kingdoms, their wealth, their army. Why, my lord? So they can come and kill us? Once they reach Indraprastha, do you think they will forget what we did to them today? Even if they do, will Drupad stay quiet when he hears what happened to his precious daughter in Hastinapur? Do you think her brother Drishtadhyuman will, when he hears how Dushashan dragged her into the Sabha and tried to strip her naked? Oh, Dhritarashtra, you have been so rash. We must fetch them here at once and take it all back again. Otherwise, we are as good as dead. He grew thoughtful while his father trembled on his throne. In a moment, Duryodhan cried, I have it. Call them back. Tell them that in fairness we must play another game of dice. The two kingdoms shall be the stakes. He who loses must go into exile in the forest for 12 years with his brothers, then spend the 13th year disguised, and so no one knows them. If any of the exiles is discovered, they must spend another 12 years in the forest, just one roll of the dice to decide this. A cold smile touched his lips. It is only fair after all. Anyone can win. Call them back. We know the blemishless Yudhishthir can never refuse his elders anything. Then softly he added, in 13 years I shall be strong indeed. While they roam the forest wearing deerskin, when they return, they'll be easy to kill. A vision of the untold wealth of the Pandavas rose like a dream before that prince's eyes. But now his mother Gandhari cried to her husband, my lord, it is perilous to breach a dam built across a great lake. Don't listen to Duryodhan. You must not become the cause of the destruction of the house of Kuru. Duryodhan gasped. Mother, she continued, I feel ashamed that you are my son. Evil prince, I wish we had listened to Vidur and done away with you when you were born. How the wolves and jackals bayed that night, I can still hear them in my mind. Oh, you are the root of every sin that will bring ruin to this land. You only envied the Pandavas, never tried to understand or know them or discover what they have suffered. Listen to me today. Abandon this monstrous plan. The gods themselves have given you another chance to save yourself. Seize it with both hands, Duryodhan. Not all is lost yet. If you relent, the Pandavas may even forget what you did to them. I beg you, my son, and you, my lord, don't invite doom back into this Sabha. It has just left us by some miracle of grace. Duryodhan, you know how much your father loves you and how weak he is because of his blindness. Don't lead him to his death and yourself with him. Duryodhan ignored his mother and said again to the king, Father, you know the danger. The Pandavas will never forget today's shame. Even now they must be plotting against us. Before it is too late, call them back for one last game. Dhritarashtra summoned a court messenger. He said to the man, have the Pandavas called back. Tell Yudhishthir I said that in fairness, one final game of dice must be played. For if my son had lost today, he would have given up his kingdom. The messenger rode on the swiftest horse in the king's stables and soon overtook the Pandavas on their way home. Yudhishthir reined his chariot in, and fear laid its hand on his heart. He had been expecting this rider, and he felt immutable destiny approach him again. The messenger said, the king asks you to return to Hastinapur. He says you must play one last game of dice. Yudhishthir bowed his head briefly, then to his brother's amazement, he turned his chariot around. Bhim said, what are you doing? Yudhishthir replied evenly, God has ordained the fate of every man. There is no escape from what he has written. Good fortune and evil are both beyond our control. We are helpless to resist destiny. We can only remain calm in the face of whatever happens to us. I must obey Dhritarashtra. It is my dharma. He is my uncle, and he gave us our freedom. I must go back, he sighed, though I am certain the dice will take everything from me again. But I will not be able to live with myself if I don't return. His brothers knew, even Bhim, that Yudhishthir was right, and they said nothing. The Pandavas returned to Hastinapur to play another game of dice. The second game of dice. In the court of Hastinapur, Duryodhan, his brothers Shakni and Karan waited. The dice had been laid out, the same ones. Heralded by the king's messenger, the Pandavas arrived in their uncle's Sabha. Dhritarashtra said, I knew you would come, Yudhishthir. After you left, Duryodhan said I had no right to give back what you had lost. He said it was like stealing from him. I told him I could not ask for what I had returned. He asked for one more game of dice. I thought it was only dharma. Duryodhan said, one game and our kingdom's the stake. Shakuni plays for me. He who loses goes into the jungle with his brothers for 12 years. And the winner shall have his kingdom and everything in it. The losers must spend one more year in Agyatwas, in disguise. If any of the exiles is recognized during the 13th year, they must all spend another 12 years in the forest. Here were high stakes. Duryodhan paused, his eyes boring into Yudhishthir's. The Kaurav said, shall we play? Yudhishthir's mind churned within him, but he showed no sign of his anxiety. He bowed his head, more to fate than his malevolent cousin, and replied quietly, let us play. He was as calm as a lake on which not a breath of air stirs. Like a tiger that had skewered the deer that escaped him once, Shakni faced Yudhishthir again, twirling the dice in his soft hands. Is the wager agreed upon? He asked sourly. Yudhishthir nodded. Shakni said, you roll first, O Emperor. Yudhishthir knew the prize, but he felt queerly light-hearted. At least this time his brothers and Draupadi were not put up. What was a kingdom or a 13 years exile compared with losing them? He had lived through that. These were small stakes for him now. Calmly, Yudhishthir threw the dice and had a fair score, but he had no doubt Shakni would beat it, and that evil one did. Smoothly, Duryodhan jumped up in triumph and embraced his sleek uncle. One, they cried in one voice. The Pandavas hung their heads, but now there was no dissent among them. This loss was negligible compared to the last time. The brothers may have even felt the wilderness would do them good. They had grown soft with all the luxury they lived amidst Indraprastha. They had been raised in a jungle, and part of them always longed for the freedom of the wilds. Most of all, they were together, and Panchali with them. They were unafraid and quite unattached to comfort or wealth. Fate called them. They were all certain of that now, especially after the Sabha. They would answer her call. The Pandavas prepared themselves for exile. They put on garments of tree bark and deer skin, as the banished must. As they emerged from their apartment, Dushashan and some of his brothers saw them in the passage and burst out laughing. Dushashan cried, "What is this? Has Hastinapur become a jungle or a manga that animals roam to deceive me? Or is that a fat cow I see waddling towards me?" Bhim breathed, "You preen and mock today, but you will not laugh during the war. Enjoy our exile, cousin, because one day I will cut the hand with which you dragged Draupadi from your wrist. I will tear your heart with which I will tear your heart out of your chest and drink your blood." The son of the wind spoke so menacingly, Dushashan drew back from him in fear. The Pandavas came to see Dhritarashtra, Bhishma, Krip, and Dron. They took leave of the Kuru elders. Other than formal farewells, no word passed between them. Dhritarashtra's face was a mask again, and the others blessed the sons of Pandu quickly, hardly daring to look at. But when they came to their uncle Vidur in private, he embraced them with the tears in his eyes. "May God protect you and help keep your oaths." Dhritarashtra's sons bide your time in patience, Yudhishthir. Fate always tests those whom she would exalt. She tries them in the wilderness, the years of exile will flit by, and you will come home in glory. He paused, overwhelmed. Then Vidur remembered, "Leave her with me." Yudhishthir nodded. Vidur drew a deep breath and said, "Ah, my sons, cultivate patience and serenity. It is to master these that fate sends you into the jungle. Learn from nature. She has many lessons to teach. Learn to be as calm and generous as water, as full as the earth, as brilliant as the sun, as powerful as the tameless air, and keep compassion for all the living." He hugged them and they wept when he finally bid them farewell. Once more, Yudhishthir came to Bhishma and touched his feet. Bhishma blessed him distantly, his craggy face inscrutable. At last, the Pandavas came to their mother, from whom they had never yet parted. They stood before her, their hearts too full to speak. Draupadi also stood beside her husband, her eyes bleary and her hair hanging loose below her waist. She had sworn she would not tie it until Bhim kept his oath and tore Dushashan's heart from his chest, so she could wash her hair in his blood. Now, like a wild Vetalis, Vetali is another name for Mahakali. Vetali. So, like a wild Vetali, her black tresses streamed over her face, and her shoulders and her eyes were red with crying. Kunti, who had just yesterday seen her sons as rulers of the earth, now saw them wearing deerskin and tree bark and their ornaments discarded. At first, she was brave, but when she saw Draupadi, she clasped the young queen to her and began to sob. "My precious child, forgive my sons, be kind to them, Panchali. Now they have only you to care for them. You could have made them ashes with a look from your eye and all the Kauravas too. Yet, after all that happened, the only boon you asked for was your husband's freedom. I know most queens would have chosen another path, especially after none of my sons spoke for you." You are a woman of great purity. I bless you, my daughter, and I thank the gods you are my son's wife. Both women wept and Draupadi wiped Kunti's tears, saying, "Don't worry, mother, I will look after them." Kunti said to her, "I leave my Sahadev, who is still like a child, in your care. Be not only a wife, but a mother to him." She hugged Sahadev and her other sons, crying, "Look after one another, and this jewel of a woman the gods have blessed you with." As they touched her feet, Kunti became hysterical. She cried out their names, calling to her husband in heaven to watch over them, calling on God to protect them. How would she live without them for 13 years? She clasped them to her, one after the other, and would not release them. Finally, Vidur took her hands and said, "You will have plenty of time to cry when they have gone. Come away now. The sooner you let them go, the sooner they will return to you." Kunti allowed Vidur to lead her inside. Before she lost control of herself again, her sons left the palace. They walked through the streets, out of the city of their ancestors and their misfortune. The people of Hastinapur thronged those streets and followed the Pandavas to the city gates. They wanted to follow them into exile, even as an old age ago. The people of Ayodhya had wanted to follow Ram when he was banished. The people always see clearly into the hearts of those who rule them. They said to one another, "Duryodhan wants to be king with Shakuni, Dushashan, and Karan beside him. And then not our homes or families shall be safe. When demons rule, how can anything be safe? Not our heritage, our faith, or our happiness will be secure. The world will perish if Duryodhan rules the Kurus. Let us leave this accursed city and follow Pandu's sons wherever they go. Let us follow Yudhishthir to the forest." The people of Hastinapur cried to the Pandavas, "Princes, you have been banished by treachery. We, the people, are with you. Don't desert us. Yudhishthir, we will be ruined if Duryodhana rules us. He will corrupt our children and plunge us all into darkness. But if we stay with you, Pandavas, we will be happy. Your nobility will make our lives fragrant as the lotuses do the water on which they rest." We see all the virtues of Dharam in you. We are the people, we know what we see. Duryodhan does not deceive us, nor does Shakni. It is not from pity, but for our own welfare that we want to go with you. We want to save ourselves from these devils. We will follow you into exile. They set up a great noise, and Yudhishthir spoke gently to them. "My friends, only your affection and loyalty make you see such qualities in us where they hardly exist." "You are too modest, Yudhishthir," someone shouted. The surging crowd took up that cry. "The Pandavas are too pure," they said. "They could kill the Kauravas and rule both Hastinapur and Indraprastha if only they weren't so noble. We want Yudhishthir for our king, even if it is in the jungle." Yudhishthir raised both his hands to quieten them, and when they fell silent, he said, "You must stay behind, my friends. You must think of Bhishma and Dhritarashtra. Vidur and my mother Kunti, Bhishma had served you long and devotedly, and so have the king and Vidur. They also share your grief at our exile. You must be of solace to them." Dhritarashtra feels no remorse, or he would not have called you back to play a second time. Even if that is true, what about the others? Will you abandon Bhishma, Vidur, and my mother in their grief? They were amazed at any other man would have encouraged them to go with him, at least to teach Duryodhan a lesson. But with the tears in his eyes, Yudhishthir pleaded, "You must return to your homes where you belong. Make it easier for us to leave you. In 13 years, we will come back to claim what is ours." He folded his hands and begged them not to follow him any further. At last, the crowd was mollified. The people said, "We must not make their sorrow sharper than it is. Come, we'll do as he asks. After all, he's our king. We'll be patient and wait for you to return, Yudhishthir. Let them go quickly, so they will come back quickly." Convinced by the justice of what Yudhishthir said, they cried, "Go in peace. We will wait for your return." Thus the Pandavas climbed into their chariots, rode away from the city of their defeat. The crowd stayed where it was, gazing after them. The people hardly saw clearly for the tears in their eyes. Even when the chariots had driven out of sight, they stood on mutely. Perhaps they hoped the princes would change their minds and come back. At last, sadly, they did turn back into the city and their homes. Dark foreboding for the future lay heavily upon them. We'll stop here and start reading from this page next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.